Welcome. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Leave your comments, I read them carefully. And now, without further ado, get ready to dive into each story. Enjoy them. White Veils. I never imagined that a family anecdote could rob me of sleep for years. But everything changed in the early hours of December 23, 2004, when I agreed to spend the holidays with my uncles at their ranch, La Herradura, 20 kilometers from Jerez, Zacatecas. I was 14 and craved that rural isolation, clear nights, the smell of firewood, and the distant gallop of water running through irrigation channels. We arrived at dusk. My uncles left the corral lamps on because the mules grew restless with the coyotes. Yet within that pale glow lurked something more than animals. I've always been an insomniac. The first day, after exploring the town and helping with errands, I went to bed in the room facing the pasture. Around 2 a.m., the cold tore me from a light sleep, tangled in blankets. I tugged so hard that the comforter slid to the floor. As I bent to pick it up, my eyes met the large window. I had to blink several times to believe it. Just a few meters away, on the frost-covered grass, stood figures draped in white sheets. They were tall, motionless, so much so that I thought of stakes with cloths to scare away birds. I counted 16 before a shiver made me close the curtains. My heart was pounding, but I'd learned to swallow my fears. I wrapped myself again and pretended none of it was real. The next morning, the ranch smelled of pot-brewed coffee and rustic bread. While spreading butter on a steaming piece, I joked lightly, "Last night, your scarecrows dressed up fancy." My uncle Lauro froze mid-sip. He looked at me with such severity that the table seemed to tremble. He muttered, "Those veils are not to be touched." I didn't ask. The silence that followed was heavier than any explanation. The days passed quietly. I strolled to the town, bought groceries, and befriended the children playing near the bandstand. Nights, however, became harder to endure. Sometimes I heard a soft brushing outside, as if the breeze dragged fabric along the walls. I never opened the window. I hid under the blanket until the roosters crowed. Each dawn I promised myself I'd ask, but the look on my uncle's face, fixed like a blade on my neck, was enough to stop me. Christmas came without further incident. I returned to the city convinced my mind had mixed dreams with shadows. For years I didn't go back to La Herradura. Life went on, high school, college, work. The ranch became a hazy memory. Everything resurfaced in 2019 when Lauro died of a sudden heart attack. I traveled to the funeral with my cousin Clara. My aunt Josefina's sadness was laced with an odd exhaustion, as though she carried a secret too heavy to bear. That night we stayed with her for company. After the rosary, sitting by the stove, Josefina clung to my arm. Without me asking, she began to speak. She said that decades earlier, a plague of weasels had ravaged the henhouse. Lauro got up many nights to hunt them. On one of those rounds he saw what he thought was laundry hanging in the pasture. He drew closer and caught a thick smell, like wet earth. He yanked the cloth off the nearest figure and found nothing. No post, no body, only the sheet floating for a few seconds before collapsing shapelessly to the ground. The shock made him stagger back. Looking up, he saw the other figures had moved one step closer to him, though no feet held them. He ran to the house, locked every door, and by dawn there was no trace of veils or footprints. Since then, Josefina continued, the visitors returned, sometimes after 2 months, sometimes half a year. They always appeared in odd numbers and during a waxing moon. With each visit they drew nearer to the house. Lauro stopped shouting at them. He understood his words reached no human ears. He simply prayed at the window, lamp in hand, until dawn erased the silhouettes. He never again uncovered one. As Josefina spoke, the wind rattled the hallway windows. Clara and I tried to downplay it, though the chill climbed like mercury. My aunt added that, curiously, the last appearance had been 2 years earlier, after a surgery that nearly cost Lauro his life. That dawn the figures gathered so close they could touch the wall. By morning he woke healthy, almost cheerful, as if something had granted him extra time. From that day he never saw the Vales again, until his death. She swore she'd glimpsed them at the edge of the corral when the paramedics confirmed his passing. I didn't sleep. I went out to the yard with an old flashlight. The air smelled of wet hay and irrigation motors. I walked to the spot where I had seen those shapes 15 years before. The grass was pressed into irregular circles, as if something heavy had stood there for hours. My boots crunched, and with every step the darkness seemed to tighten. I returned to the house convinced my memory was playing tricks on me, but one detail froze me. As I scraped the sole at the doorstep, a thin, white, damp strand clung to my heel. I remembered that viscous feel. It was identical to what I'd felt picking up my childhood comforter that night in 2004. Months later, Josefina decided to sell the ranch. Before signing the papers, she asked me for a favor, to burn down the shed where useless equipment was stored. She wanted to leave the land clean and avoid accidents. I agreed. One Sunday in April, I brought gasoline and matches. The adobe and tile structure was nearly in ruins. As I opened the door, a foul current of air hit me. Inside were rusty tools, sacks of gnawed grain, and hanging on wire hooks, 20 yellowed sheets. Dust covered them, but recent dampness weighed them down as if someone had just wrung them out. I stepped back. Something inside me screamed not to touch them. I gulped air and poured fuel over the wood. I struck a match. The flame raced eagerly. I stepped out and barred the door. The roof groaned, the beams wailed, and amid the crackling I heard an impossible sound, cloths stirring without wind. I didn't turn back. The flames devoured the shed until dawn. I thought it was over. But the nightmares began the following week. Always the same. Standing in the middle of a field, I watched figures draped in sheets approach. They had no features, only outlines that seemed to absorb the faint night light. Upon waking, my shirt was soaked with sweat and sometimes white fibers clung to my arms. The doctor spoke of post-traumatic stress. I knew it was something else. The confirmation came on November 1st, 2020. Confined by the pandemic, we celebrated Day of the Dead by placing altars in the backyard of my home in Zacatecas City. At 3 a.m., I stepped outside to extinguish the candles for safety. The street was deserted, black. Yet a white glow cut across the gate. Opposite, by the lamppost, stood a solitary figure draped in a sheet. There was no wind, yet the fabric rippled as if breathing. I stepped back and the bulb blew out. The silence became absolute. Only my breathing broke the night. The figure didn't move. I closed the door, slid the bolt, and through the crack I could still see it standing there. By dawn it was gone, though the grass bore the same pressed mark as at the ranch. Since then I live on alert. No matter where I go, every time the moon reaches half its cycle, I feel the presence behind the curtains. Sometimes, crossing a street, the reflection in shop windows betrays a white veil hidden among the passers-by. I don't dare confront it. I fear that if I ever lift that cloth, I'll find that beneath there isn't emptiness but the shadow that's claimed me since childhood. I've learned to sleep with the lights on, but the slightest creak shatters my rest. Then I remember my uncle's warning, those veils are not to be touched, and I understand that the distance between life and whatever waits standing in the dark is no thicker than a sheet. They say the living choose their ghosts. I didn't choose mine. They chose me that frozen dawn. They watch me patiently and I know they advance, even though their feet never touch the ground. Perhaps the day they reach my bedside the story will end. Or perhaps, as with Lauro, they'll leave satisfied after claiming what they came for. Meanwhile I remain here, writing with eyelids swollen from insomnia, trying to warn whoever reads these lines. If one night you see something standing, covered in white and too still, don't approach. Don't speak. Don't lift the cloth. Because believe me, nothing underneath is far worse than something, and emptiness can follow you for a lifetime. Beast of Fire. I've never told this without feeling my blood run cold, but I think it's time to get it off my chest. It was 1998, and I was 17. We lived in San Miguel del Mesquite, a ranch lost among the hills of Zacatecas, where the nights are so dark it feels like the world ends at the edge of the cornfield. My older brother, Rogelio, was our mother's pride and joy until he started hanging out with Santiago, the hierbaro, a healer who worked at the fair dances performing cleansings with pyrrole branches. Father hated him, saying he stole the faith of humble people. One afternoon, after an argument that shook the house, Rogelio took off without saying goodbye. He was 19, carrying a resentment that could be seen in the tense set of his shoulders as he walked down the dusty road. In the first months, we received barely 2 letters, written in a trembling hand. He said he was learning the ancient art and that we shouldn't worry. After that, silence. Mother would jump at the sound of horse hooves on the dirt road, thinking it might be him, but it never was. Nearly 3 years passed. In that time, I grew up faster than I wanted, helping Father with the corn and tending the 4 goats that kept us alive. Meanwhile, the ranch filled with sinister tales. People spoke of a creature seen among the agaves, a large, upright figure, covered in fur, with the head of a coyote. They said it appeared when the wind blew hot, just before the hills caught fire in the sunset. One April night, when the mesquite flowers release a sweet dust that sticks to your throat, I woke startled by the frantic bleating of the goats. I ran barefoot to the corral, lighting my way with a kerosene lamp. What I saw is something I will never erase. 3 animals lay gutted, as if someone had worked with a scalpel. The earth was like a sponge that didn't absorb much, red. I found no broken fences or human footprints, just the smell of burnt wool and a loose latch swinging. My stomach sank. I ran back to the house, but I didn't call my parents. Something told me silence was somehow safer. The next day, the news spread faster than the flocks of chachalacas. But something worse came. In the neighboring town, El Torero, they found a man lying beside the old water wheel. His clothes were soaked in dried blood, his eyes lost as though watching distant flames. It was Rogelio. When Father and I arrived, I recognized him by his worn boots. He clutched a cheap mezcal flask and muttered nonsensical words, except one that he repeated like a feverish child: "Fire, fire, fire." We saw no wounds on his body, only scratches on his arms, like branches had clawed him. The blood was not his. Against Father's will, we took him home. Mother said that if God had put this trial on us, it was because we had to bear it. Rogelio spent 2 days sprawled on the cot, mumbling twisted prayers and clutching the bottle. When he finally opened his eyes fully, the first thing he did was laugh with a voice that was not his own. I was alone in the room. That laughter filled my chest with ashes. I asked what had happened, and he looked at me as if seeing through me, so deep that I felt he could read the last lie I had ever told. He murmured something about a promise he couldn't fulfill and the price one pays when playing with other people's fires. That same dawn, he ran away again. In the kitchen remained his viscous footprints mixed with black sand, as if he had stepped on embers. Father said it was the last straw, that he would not allow more evil magic in the house. But before he could finish the sentence, the ranch dogs began to howl, a long, mournful chorus, like a premonition of grief. A chill ran up my spine as I remembered the rumors about the furry being with a canine head. We bolted the doors, turned off the lamp, and pretended no one was there. Outside, heavy steps crunched the stones. Then a bang against the barn. Then silence. We barely breathed. Mother whispered prayers, her lips barely moving. Just when I thought it was over, something scratched the hall. 3 slow scratches dragging across the wood. I cannot describe the cold that invaded me as I recognized the pattern. It was the same as the slaughtered goats. Someone, or something, sniffed the air behind the door. I smelled the acrid, thick scent of dried blood mixed with fermented liquor. It lingered for what felt like an eternity before moving away, leaving a deep, almost human growl. At dawn, we went out trembling to inspect. The barn door had been ripped off in a single pull. Inside, we found broken sacks of corn, the grain scattered, and upon it a trail of bare footprints ending in a charred circle, as if someone had stood wrapped in fire. Father swore it was Rogelio, now transformed into a malevolent Nahul. He said the Hyerbro had initiated him into forbidden arts and then damned him. Mother, broken with grief, insisted her son was still a poor sick boy, but the ranch people do not forgive. That afternoon, a group of men arrived with machetes and old rifles. They said we had to hand over the fire witch or they would hunt him like an animal. I trembled thinking they meant my brother. To buy time, I swore we didn't know where he was. They left, promising to return. That night, as the moon waned like a worn fingernail, I heard footsteps in the yard. I peeked through the window crack and saw him. Rogelio stood beneath the mesquite, covered in white dust, almost naked, his torso marked with symbols painted in lime. His eyes glowed like embers. He was not the fur and snout monster the rumors described, but there was something inhuman in his stillness, in the way invisible smoke escaped his mouth with each exhale. He saw me, raised his hand, and for a moment I thought he would call my name. Instead, he put his index finger to his lips, asking for silence. Then he pointed to the corral and shook his head, warning me not to leave. Suddenly, the dogs howled again, and a commotion arose behind the neighbor's house, screams, gunshots, neighing. I smelled fresh smoke. Rogelio disappeared among the maguey plants with light steps. I tried to run after him, but a force pinned me to the ground. I heard shotgun blasts and the shriek of something I had never heard before, half roar, half laughter, then silence. The same brutal silence that follows storms. When the roosters crowed, we went to see what had happened. We found our neighbor Julian, his beard singed, muttering that he had risen among us, his stable a black skeleton and the cows dead without a drop of blood. The authorities came the next afternoon but left quickly, claiming it was drunken storytelling. The ranch men, however, formed groups to hunt the culprit. They found Rogelio on the slope of La Culebra Hill as the sun began to fall. I went with them, forced by father, and my hands still shake remembering. We made him kneel in front of a tiny fire. He chanted in a language I didn't know. His arms were covered in scratches, his expression so resigned he seemed old. When he saw us, he smiled sadly and whispered, "Stay back, brother." There was no time to move. Julian, full of rage, fired his shotgun. The lead struck Rogelio in the chest and knocked him onto the fire. There was a flash, a blast of hot air, and nothing. Where he fell remained only a perfect circle of ash. No blood, no body, nothing. The men stepped back, making the sign of the cross, murmuring that we had destroyed a curse. I fell to my knees with a scream that choked in my throat, because it came not from my voice but from the depths of my stomach. I felt part of the ranch die in that fire. That night, the last of April, we slept with doors open to show that there was nothing to fear. Yet I could not sleep. In the distance, the coyotes of the mountains kept whining, but among their voices I heard a human lament, low, endless, as if burning without being consumed. 27 years have passed. The ranch emptied, my parents died, the lands were sold, and San Miguel del Mesquite is barely a handful of empty houses. I moved to the city, studied accounting, had children who have never known true darkness. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I smell the scent of slaughtered wool and hear the creak of the barn door. Then I know my brother still roams the hills, half man, half ember, searching for a final sip of mezcal to quench the thirst left by the fire. And on those nights, I hold my children tighter, because fear is never conquered, it is only inherited. I do not know what he was, Rogelio. Perhaps a Nahul, perhaps a boy broken by life, possessed only by his own rage. What I do know is that every spring, when the wind turns warm and dust clings to the skin, a huge dog with red eyes prowls the corrals of Zacatecas. They say its footsteps smell of smoke, and if you follow it, you find a circle of ash and an empty bottle. I swear it's true, because I saw it, and I still cannot sleep without waking drenched in sweat at the creak of the wood, sure that my door will feel 3 slow, deep scratches again, claiming the debt that still binds me to the fire. The Black Dog. My name is Isaias. I was born in 1985, and this happened in the summer of 2007 when I was returning to the El Arenal Ranch in the mountains of Durango. I had spent the day working in the municipal center and, confident I could catch the last bus, I arrived at the stop at 5:02, just in time to see the cloud of dust the engine left as it drove away up the road. I didn't want to spend money on a hotel for the night. Besides, at that age, you believe nothing bad can happen. So I resigned myself to hitchhiking. Luckily, about 20 minutes later, Ruben's truck stopped. A local from the ranch, El Naranjo, dropped me near the stone crossroads where the path begins to cut through the woods. I still had about 6 kilometers to go home, and the sun was still hot. I had known that trail since I was a child. Narrow track, pines, oaks, the smell of earth and resin. I carried my compact camera around my neck. Photography was my obsession, and that evening painted the trunks in gold. As I walked, the chirping of birds echoed among the branches, and the shadows stretched. 2 kilometers in, I noticed something strange by a fallen log, a small circle of extinguished red candles, a jar with dark soil, and in the center, a rag doll pierced with rusty pins. The wick still smelled of fresh wax. I took a photo. Looking through the viewfinder, I felt a slight dizziness, as if the air vibrated. I thought about superstition, but I still crossed myself before moving on. I took a step, and something crunched under my boot. I tilted the flashlight I had in my backpack, though there was still light. It was a studio photo, ID-sized, faded from humidity. It showed a man with a thick mustache and a serious gaze. There was a burn hole right in the middle of his forehead. A shiver ran from my neck to my heels. I threw the photo onto the pile of leaves and kept walking, trying not to look back. I hadn't gone 100 meters when the forest fell silent. No birds, no insects, only my own breathing. Then I saw it. A gigantic black dog standing in the middle of the path. Taller than a Rottweiler, but thinner, with fur so dark it seemed to absorb the little light left. Its eyes glowed like burning coals. It didn't growl, didn't wag its tail, it just watched me. I forced myself to move calmly, holding its gaze so it wouldn't sense my fear. 3 steps closer, the dog turned elegantly and began walking along the trail, head held high, without looking back. Instinct screamed at me not to follow, but the path was narrow and the forest thick. There was no way around it without getting lost. I looked down briefly to adjust my camera, and when I looked up again, the dog had vanished. I heard no leaves, no barking, no breaking branches, just silence. I continued, pulse racing. The sky turned a dirty red, and a cold wind blew that did not belong to that time of year. The hoot of an owl echoed to my left, and when I turned, the flashlight illuminated something hanging from a branch. The same photo of the mustached man, now tied with a black ribbon. I stepped back and tripped over a rock. I almost fell. As I stood, I saw the photo wasn't hanging from a branch, it was clutched in the dog's paw, standing behind me, so close I could smell its rancid breath. I don't remember screaming. I ran. I felt branches scratch my face, the camera hitting my chest. I ran until the sky turned violet. When I stopped to orient myself, I realized I wasn't on the trail, but in a clearing I had never seen. In the center, a circle of stones formed an altar under a dead oak. On the rocks, 13 aged portraits. Each had a hole in the forehead. Among them, I recognized the image I had stepped on. Night fell abruptly, without twilight. I turned on my flashlight, and it trembled over the photos. The instant the light touched the last one, a groan rose from the ground, like air escaping a cavern. The stones began shedding damp earth, and the dog appeared, emerging from the roots, dragging invisible chains. Its red eyes fixed on me, and the flashlight went out, though I swear the batteries were new. Everything went black, and the air smelled of burnt flesh. I felt a rough tongue brush my hand. I closed my eyes tightly and murmured the Lord's Prayer. When I opened them, the dog had stepped back a few meters. It seemed to stagger, as if something was pulling it backward. From its fur emerged a bony arm. A yellowed hand clutched its back, and slowly the emaciated torso of an old woman covered in earth appeared, her eyes cooked shut and mouth sealed with rusty wire. I wanted to run, but my legs didn't respond. The woman raised her free hand, pointing at my chest. I felt a sharp pain, as if a nail pierced my sternum. The smell of rust filled my mouth. At my feet, the camera appeared. The flash fired on its own, illuminating the altar and blinding me. When the light faded, there was no dog, no old woman, only the circle of stones and the photos burning without fire, consuming themselves silently. The clearing went dark, and suddenly, a murmur arose from behind every trunk, muted voices, broken prayers, whispers. The wind swirled around me, carrying dust that scraped my skin. I realized the forest was breathing. Then I remembered what my great-grandmother said: in these mountains, witchcraft is inherited, and debts are paid with family blood. I clenched my fists and recited the names of my mother, father, and siblings, one by one, as if asking the earth for permission to return home. The wind stopped. A silvery grey light bathed the clearing. It was the moon, high in the sky. I saw the path a few meters away, now clear. I walked slowly, hands trembling. Each step seemed to sink deeper than it should, as if the ground was soft. At last, I reached the main road and spotted the first house of the ranch. Everything was silent, no roosters, no dogs. I knocked on Don Laureano's door, the nearest neighbor. No answer. I pushed, and it opened. The house was empty, the table set, the food cold. I continued to mine. The door was ajar. Inside, my mother slept in the rocking chair as if nothing had happened. She breathed peacefully. I didn't want to wake her. I needed to believe normalcy still existed. I went to my room. The camera still hung around my neck. I checked the memory card. There was only one image, taken at 5:48. It showed me from behind, next to the altar, illuminated by the flash. Behind me, the black dog and the old woman with her mouth sewn shut. I don't remember taking that photo. I tried to delete the file, but the screen flickered and the camera turned off forever. The next day, I returned to the clearing in full daylight, accompanied by Reuben and two neighbors. We found no stones, no photos, no footprints. Only my broken flashlight and the smell of ash on the trail, exactly where I had first seen the dog. We discovered a huge footprint, canine in shape, with 4 claws marked in the dry soil. No one dared touch it. 18 years have passed. I never walked that path at night again. I keep the printed photo from that same week in a locked drawer. Sometimes I hear it vibrate, as if something is demanding to come out. There are nights when the ranch dogs begin howling for no reason. Then I know the hill remembers my name, and when the wind comes down from the dead oak, I recall the smell of wax and rust and the hiss of candles I never extinguished. I don't seek anyone's belief. I write this so that if you ever encounter a black dog on the path, you know not all animals belong to this world, and some photographs take themselves as promises of a debt that still pulses beneath the earth. Cursed feathers. I hadn't set foot on the El Mezquite Ranch in the depths of the Huasteca Potosina for 20 years. And yet, the reddish dust got under my nails as easily as it did when I was a child. I returned because I had sold my car in the city to cover debts and needed a refuge. The big house my mother inherited after my grandfather's death still stood, splintered and silent. From the gate, I could see the old chicken coop collapsed. The wind dragged grey feathers across the dry furrows, as if the ranch still breathed through them. I felt a shiver. It was memory, the awakening of those birds that were never entirely birds. In 2008, I was 6 years old. Mom and I had come here to sign the papers for my grandfather's funeral. We arrived at night. The air smelled of green firewood and fermented corn. According to Mom, I fell asleep in the truck bed, hugging a toy shovel. At dawn, she found me playing behind the water tank with 3 wild turkeys. They weren't the robust fairground turkeys. They seemed half scraggy, feathers bristled, with enormous amber eyes. They stayed very close, without fear. Mom shooed them away with a ragged clap and saw them slip toward the sugarcane. That morning was the first crack of something that would never close. In the following days, I would sneak out to look for them. I always found them. I'd sit under the pyrrole tree where Dad used to hang hammocks as a child, and there they would appear. Sometimes they pecked the ground, other times they just surrounded me in a perfect triangle. I don't remember conversations. Just laughter that wasn't mine, whistles that seemed like twisted words. By noon, when the sun split the salt flats, they vanished. Every afternoon, Mom would shoo them away with shouts. I tried to ignore them because there were wakes, neighbors, paperwork, but her worry thickened like tar. On the third night, the impossible happened. Mom was preparing atoll in the kitchen. The roof sheets creaked. She thought of cats, went out with a flashlight, and saw the same 3 turkeys standing on the ground, watching her. Their necks followed the light, then they rose toward the water tank. When she shone the flashlight, she found my silhouette standing almost 3 meters high, motionless on the hot sheet metal. The flashlight trembled in her hand. The pot of atoll spilled, and she climbed as best she could up the multipurpose tank, scratching herself. She brought me down in her arms. I don't remember the climb or the descent, just the sensation of having been placed there by someone taller than the sky. After that incident, I slept with her, but the turkeys kept circling. At dawn, they would peck at the door. They never clucked. They tapped with their beaks as if demanding something. Sometimes Mom would peek out and see them on the railing, still watching us through the window. At daybreak, I always found traces of dirt on my clothes. I said I didn't know where it came from. I wasn't lying, I truly didn't know. The disappearance happened on a Tuesday. Mom went to the notary in Aquismon and left me with Aunt Angela. In a moment of inattention, I slipped out. No one knew where. The search lasted 15 hours. They combed the cane fields, the irrigation channels, even the old well. They shouted my name until their voices broke. The state police filed a report. It was unusually cold for April when the next day I knocked on the front gate. I was covered in dry mud up to my knees, shivering. Mom says that when she hugged me, I repeated one phrase, "Keep them away, please, they smell of death." Backlit, the 3 birds waited aligned. Their crests seemed longer, their eyes more human. That afternoon, we locked the house and fled to Matawala. We never returned, until now. However, as I crossed adolescence, I began dreaming of old, crackly women laughing with toothless mouths. I saw their skin embedded with feathers and the perfect triangle they formed around me. I woke sweating, never told anyone. I wanted to believe it was just a nightmare. Last night, now an adult, I entered my old room. The air smelled of rotten manure. I checked the wardrobe and found my toy shovel covered with feathers identical to those from before. I used my cell phone to light the room and saw something at the window, 3 hunched shadows. I lifted the light, and only the mesquite swayed, but the glass bore fresh beak marks, with grey dust stuck like ash. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I sat in front of the door, waiting for the dry knock I had always feared. When the first light touched the corral, I heard the birds. It wasn't clucking, it was a human throat rasp. I opened slowly. On the other side weren't turkeys, but 3 bony old women, cracked skin, amber eyes, wearing dark, dirt-stained sackcloth. One extended a long hand with bumps resembling feather quills ready to sprout. She didn't speak. She lowered her index finger to the ground and drew a circle. I felt an invisible tether pull me toward them, just like when I was a child. I slammed the door, pushed the table, and ran to the back. I left without keys, without my wallet, straight into the woods. I ran to the collapsed well where I had looked for tadpoles as a child. The air was heavy. At every step, I heard wings flapping. I didn't look back. I went into the dry mouth of the well, now a dusty cave. In the dark, I remembered lost time, the climb onto the tank, the disappearance. I realized something. They hadn't taken me. I had followed them. They had taught me to climb without ladders, to pass through cracks. It was a game for them. I was their doll, and I had returned. This was not an inherited ranch, it was a pen, and I was their failed offspring. Outside, scratching began on the rock, 3 rhythmic claws, then silence. I thought they would leave with the full light of day. The sun rose, and the shadows inside the well shrank, but the cold worsened. The scratching changed to hollow tapping. I looked up, 3 silhouettes cut against the sky. The old women leaned right at the edge. Their faces were inverted, black eye sockets, open mouths in a silent laugh revealing marbled skin. Feathers fell on my face. I felt something watching me from the bottom of the well, which was a mirror opening a larger mouth. I didn't scream. My cry stuck in my throat like stone. I touched the wall, searching for cracks. I found a fissure, pushed, and it gave way. A brick, then another. The hole spat me into a tunnel of adobe and noise. I crawled toward the light of the other exit behind the dry corrals. Emerging, I knew the ranch would no longer be mine or my mother's. It belonged to those things that played at being birds. Now I write, sitting at the Sayud Valles bus station. The phone keyboard trembles under my fingers. Occasionally someone passes and sees me pale. If the bus is late, I'll take the first one that moves. I left the ranch door open, and the shadows could follow me. But I need to tell it before they propose the game again. Perhaps they don't want to kill me. Perhaps they only want me to return to the place I belonged for 1 day and 2 nights of childhood. Yet as I type, the call of a stray turkey echoes behind the terminal. The sound is not animal, it's the rasp of an old woman celebrating. And I know that if I stay still, they will find a way to place me again on an impossible roof or at the bottom of a well without end. If I don't board that bus, tomorrow you'll read about me in the news as the man who vanished among the cane fields without leaving a trace. If I do, perhaps they will appear at the hotel window, pecking with murderous tenderness. I already hear beaks tapping on the cement floor, and the guard says there are no birds inside. No matter where I cross the threshold of sleep, they will arrive with their perfect triangle, with their tomb-scented feathers, to repeat the game that began when I was a child, and I didn't know how to tell them no. I tell this to free myself, to warn you. If you ever see 3 gray turkeys that do not fear you and whose eyes feel too human, do not let them follow you. Don't mock them, don't approach them, don't feed them, and above all, never accept their invitation to play where no one else can reach you, for you will not return the same, and perhaps, like me tonight, you will discover there is no place in the world to hide the feathers that have grown inside you. If you enjoyed these stories, give us a like and leave your comment. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can keep receiving notifications of upcoming stories. Your support helps us continue growing on YouTube.